I sold my son a house for $1 million. Later, I found out he took a loan in my name. Now I have to pay it back. The first time my son, Richard, suggested the idea, I thought it was the sweetest gesture. He wanted me to have my old house back, the one I had loved for decades, the one with the creaking stairs, the rose garden, and the small balcony that overlooked the sea. "Mom," he said, "I'll buy it for you. You won't have to worry about money anymore. You can finally go to the seaside, relax, enjoy life. You deserve it." I hesitated at first. At 70, I had grown cautious, aware of how quickly generosity can sometimes mask expectations. But Richard's eyes were so earnest, so convincing. I felt a flicker of pride, mixed with gratitude, that my son, my own flesh and blood, wanted to give me this comfort. The day he handed me the keys, I walked slowly through the rooms, my hands brushing the wallpaper, the windowsills, the familiar textures that had shaped decades of my life. I could smell the faint salt of the sea carried on the breeze, the faint scent of roses from the garden below. For the first time in years, I felt a lightness, a sense that perhaps the burdens of money and worry could finally be left behind. Richard had arranged everything so neatly, the legal papers signed, the bank accounts supposedly settled, and a small ceremony to mark the occasion. I smiled, allowed myself to feel the joy of being cared for, and even allowed him to insist on a celebratory dinner in my honor. Friends came, neighbors congratulated me, and I laughed and thanked everyone, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For a while, life was peaceful. I wandered the garden, painted on the balcony, watched the waves roll in, and let the sun warm my shoulders. Richard visited occasionally, bringing flowers or groceries, always polite, always attentive. I thought perhaps this was the life I deserved, a quiet, serene chapter to enjoy after decades of work and hardship. And yet, there was a subtle unease I couldn't shake. The paperwork had been dense and complicated, full of legal terms I barely understood. Richard had assured me that I didn't need to worry, that everything was taken care of. I trusted him. I wanted to trust him. After all, he was my son. But somewhere, deep in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered caution. It was easy to dismiss it. After all, the house was mine. Or so I thought. I walked through the rooms, arranging furniture, hanging pictures, adjusting curtains, letting myself believe that this new chapter of life was real, that I had finally earned a moment of peace. Little did I know that beneath the surface of Richard's generosity lurked deception, a plan carefully concealed designed to turn my trust into a trap. What I saw as a gift, the restoration of my old home, was only the beginning of a challenge I could never have anticipated. By the time the letters from the bank started arriving, my world of peace would shatter, and I would realize that the son I had trusted most had used me as a pawn in a scheme I could never have imagined. It began with a letter, thin and unassuming, arriving one gray morning in the mail. I opened it carefully, expecting perhaps a routine bank statement or a notice about property taxes. But the words that stared back at me made my hands tremble. "A loan in the amount of $1 million has been issued in your name. Please review the terms and begin repayment immediately." I blinked, thinking I had misread. My pulse quickened. Surely this was some clerical error. I searched for the sender's address, the signature, anything that might indicate a mistake, but everything was official, stamped and sealed with the bank's authority. Over the next few days, more letters arrived, emails, notices, reminders, each one more urgent, each one more alarming. My name, my signature, my identification had supposedly authorized a massive loan, and the payments were due. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind. I had never applied for any loan, certainly not for $1 million. How could this be happening? I called the bank, my voice quivering as I explained the situation. The clerk was polite but firm. "According to our records, the loan was issued with your consent," she said. "You authorized the request, and all documents were signed under your name." I felt my stomach drop. "No," I whispered, almost to myself. I never signed anything. I never requested this. The clerk asked me to provide identification and verify a series of security questions. I did so, hands shaking, mind racing. I left the call with no resolution, only the growing realization that this was no mistake. Someone had deliberately taken out a loan in my name, and the person most capable of such betrayal was Richard. The thought made my chest tighten. My son, the one I had trusted, the one who had presented this gift of a house, had orchestrated this. The house, the sea retreat I had believed was a gesture of love, was a sham, a clever facade to secure a loan under my name. The betrayal cut deeper than the threat of debt. It was the knowledge that someone I had loved and nurtured could so easily manipulate and deceive me. I tried confronting him. I called, my voice barely controlled, asking for an explanation. He laughed, a light, dismissive sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, it's just paperwork. Don't worry about it. I handled everything so you could enjoy the house. Relax, you don't need to think about money anymore." I could feel my heart clench. "You went behind my back," I said. Disbelief and hurt mingle in my words. "You forged documents. You took out $1 million loan in my name without my consent." Richard's laughter was cold. "Mom, you worry too much. It's all under control. Just enjoy the sea." But nothing was under control. My life, my finances, my trust had been weaponized against me. Letters continued to arrive, their tone increasingly urgent. Every day I opened my mailbox, my hands trembling, fear pressing against my ribs. I felt cornered, desperate, yet I refused to collapse into hysteria. I needed a plan. I needed help. And so I turned to someone I had known for decades, a former acquaintance, a trusted accountant who had once worked alongside me and knew the intricacies of my finances better than anyone else. If Richard thought he could ensnare me in his scheme, he had underestimated my resolve. I would fight this deception with every ounce of intelligence, patience, and dignity I possessed. It was time to collect evidence, to unravel the forgery, and to prove that the $1 million loan had been executed without my consent. The house by the sea had been a trap, but I was not defeated. The first step was admitting to myself that I could no longer rely on trust alone. Richard had shattered that long ago. I needed facts, documents, and a meticulous reconstruction of every transaction. I reached out to my former colleague, Harold Benton, an accountant I had worked with years ago. Harold was thorough, precise, and, most importantly, unflinchingly honest. The moment he understood the situation, his eyes hardened with determination. "We'll find the truth, Sally. Don't worry," he said, his voice calm but resolute. We began by reviewing the loan documents line by line. The signatures were smooth, almost eerily familiar, but Harold's experienced eye caught the inconsistencies. The strokes didn't match my usual handwriting. The pressure, the loops, even the flow of the letters deviated from my natural style. "This is forged," Harold said quietly, pointing to the documents. "He knew you'd never approve a loan like this, so he created it himself. And look here, dates that make no sense. One of these papers was supposedly signed on the day you were in the hospital." I felt a mixture of relief and fury. Relief because there was proof. Fury because Richard had so cunningly used my life, my finances, and my identity as a tool for his gain. Every polite word, every smile he had offered when presenting the gift of the house now felt like a blade twisting in my chest. Next, Harold examined phone records and emails. Calls supposedly from me authorizing the loan were traced to a number that I had never used. Emails sent from an address I did not own. Each piece of evidence was another thread, unraveling the carefully constructed lie Richard had woven. "He tried to create a paper trail," Harold said, shaking his head, "but he underestimated the record-keeping of modern finance." Armed with this evidence, we approached the bank. I felt a mixture of apprehension and determination as we walked into the branch, carrying stacks of documents, printouts, and notes. The bank initially resisted, citing their protocols and their belief that the loan had been legitimately issued. But when Harold methodically presented the proof, hospital records showing my presence elsewhere on the day of the signing, mismatched signatures, and the call logs, their defenses crumbled. It was painstaking work, unraveling the complex web Richard had spun. But each revelation, each confirmation of forgery strengthened my resolve. I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator, a strategist, a woman reclaiming control over her life. By the end of the month, the bank agreed to reassign the debt to its true initiator. The million-dollar loan, the source of sleepless nights and endless anxiety, would no longer hang over me. Richard would be held accountable both legally and financially. Sitting in the quiet of my seaside house that evening, I watched the sun dip into the horizon, the waves breaking gently against the shore. The salty air filled my lungs, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a tentative sense of peace. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had acted, collected proof, and defended myself with clarity and precision. The betrayal had not broken me. It had reminded me of my own strength. I resolved then that I would never again allow anyone to manipulate my trust for their gain. Richard had shown his true nature, and I no longer felt the need to shield him from the consequences. My life, my finances, and my dignity were mine to protect. The first battle was won. The second, I knew, was to rebuild, to reclaim a sense of freedom and joy that had been threatened but never extinguished. And so, I began to plan for a new life by the sea, a life I would live fully, independently, and without fear. With the bank's decision in my favor, a weight lifted from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months. The relief was profound, almost intoxicating. I finally had the freedom to breathe without fear, to walk through the rooms of the house without seeing shadows of deceit lurking behind every corner. Yet, the joy was tinged with a quiet resolve. Richard had shown his true colors, and I would never allow him or anyone else to manipulate me again. I decided to take a break from the chaos and truly embrace the life I had imagined when he first presented me with the house. The seaside town had always been a place of solace. Its small streets, lined with cafes and local shops, carried the scent of salt and seaweed, and the distant roar of waves was a constant, comforting presence. I rented a small, charming cottage just steps from the shore, a modest place that I could call my own without the shadows of family interference looming over me. Every morning, I walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath my feet, the horizon painted in oranges and pinks as the sun rose. I allowed myself to feel peace again, to indulge in the quiet pleasure of a life rebuilt. I began painting once more, not for recognition or sale, but for the simple love of creation. My brush glided across the canvas, capturing the play of light on the water, the shifting clouds, the movement of gulls overhead. These moments were mine, untarnished by greed or betrayal. I also met an old acquaintance, Marion, a retired accountant who had once guided me through business dealings and bookkeeping. She had been instrumental in proving Richard's fraud and remained a source of support and practical advice. Together, we organized my finances properly, ensuring that no future deception could touch me. The relief was immense. Finally, I felt secure, in control, and respected, even by institutions that had once blindly trusted Richard's claims. Word eventually reached me that Richard's attempts to exploit the loan had caused him significant legal trouble. The bank had pursued him for repayment, and the authorities had investigated the forged documents. I did not gloat, but I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served. His actions had consequences, and I was free from their burden. In my new life, I began to indulge in small joys I had once neglected. Long walks along the shore, afternoons at the local market, painting sessions with friends I had met at the seaside, even small dinners shared with neighbors who had become companions in my newfound peace. The house, the cottage, the freedom, it all felt earned. I understood now that life after betrayal was not about revenge, but about reclaiming oneself. I had faced deception, financial danger, and family betrayal, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Each wave that crashed on the shore reminded me of the power to endure, to rise again, and to protect what was truly mine, my dignity, my peace, and my independence. For the first time in many years, I slept easily, knowing that the past, with all its treachery, could no longer reach me. I had won, not through anger or confrontation, but through clarity, courage, and measured action. And in that victory, I discovered the greatest treasure of all, the unshakable belief in my own strength and the serenity of a life lived on my terms. The days passed gently, yet each one carried a growing sense of freedom I hadn't felt in decades. The letters, the calls, the relentless anxiety, they were all behind me. I no longer opened the mailbox with trepidation, nor did I feel the invisible weight of a debt that wasn't mine. Instead, I walked freely along the shoreline, letting the rhythm of the waves steady my mind and remind me that life moves forward, relentless and unyielding regardless of the betrayals we endure. Richard reached out a few times, of course, likely expecting compliance or apology. I ignored his calls at first, letting them ring unanswered, and when he sent emails filled with explanations, justifications, and empty promises of reconciliation, I deleted them without reading. His attempts to worm back into my life felt small and pathetic compared to the confidence I now held. The man who had once been my son in name only had revealed his true character. I no longer felt the need to shield him from the consequences of his own actions. Instead, I invested my energy into the life I had chosen, the life that was fully mine. My cottage became a haven, windows wide open to the sea, a small garden of flowers I had planted, in the studio where I could paint uninterrupted, unbothered, unthreatened. I experimented with new techniques, allowing myself the freedom to create without fear or expectation. Every canvas reflected not only the landscapes and seascapes around me, but also the strength, independence, and resilience that had carried me through the storm. I also began sharing my story quietly with friends and fellow art enthusiasts, not to seek validation, but to inspire those who had been silenced or manipulated by family or circumstance. I spoke of vigilance, of trusting instincts, and of standing firmly for oneself. Each conversation reinforced my own resolve, and in the eyes of those who listened, I saw respect, not just for the artist, but for the woman who had reclaimed her life. Occasionally, I thought of Richard. I acknowledged the hurt, the betrayal, the audacity it took to use me as a pawn, but I did not dwell on anger. Instead, I focused on boundaries, clarity, and the life I was building. If he wanted to remain in the ruins of his own choices, that was his concern, not mine. I had no desire to witness his downfall firsthand. The world had a way of balancing things on its own. The sea became my companion. Each morning, I watched the horizon, feeling the salt air in my lungs, listening to the gulls, letting the sun warm my face. In the evenings, I painted, read, and sometimes hosted a small gathering of friends who understood and appreciated the quiet victories of resilience. My days were full, rich, and my nights calm. Through it all, I felt a profound truth settle within me. Life is not measured by the betrayal of others, nor by the manipulations they attempt, but by the strength we find to protect our dignity and live fully in spite of them. I had been tested, deceived, and used, yet I had emerged whole, empowered, and at peace. And in that peace, I discovered the purest form of revenge, living fully, independently, and with unwavering joy. Richard was gone from my life, stripped of access, respect, and trust, and I had no desire to invite him back. The house by the sea was more than a home. It was a symbol of triumph, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable power of a woman who refused to be a victim. The final chapter of that chapter of my life began not with drama, confrontation, or rage, but with quiet affirmation. I had been freed from the fraudulent loan, shielded from Richard's manipulations, and now I was free to construct a life entirely on my own terms. I found a small, sunlit house by the sea, a modest place, but one imbued with peace, autonomy, and the sense of ownership that had been denied to me for far too long. I moved in slowly, deliberately. Every piece of furniture I placed, every curtain I hung, every brushstroke on the wall reflected not just decoration, but intention. This house was mine, my sanctuary, and each corner told the story of resilience. I painted a mural in the living room, a sweeping seascape that mirrored the view outside my windows, reminding me daily that the horizon is always there, endless and unyielding, just like the courage I had found within myself. Letters from the bank ceased, emails stopped arriving, and the silence that followed was profound. Richard's presence had evaporated, not because I waged a public war, but because truth, diligence, and justice had rendered him powerless. I no longer feared financial ruin, deception, or familial manipulation. Every wave that crashed along the shore seemed to affirm this reality. I was free. I began embracing life in ways I had postponed for decades. I explored the coastal paths, sometimes alone, sometimes with new friends I had met in town. Artists, retirees, travelers, each with stories of their own struggles and victories. I discovered small cafes where the owners remembered me by name, a local bookshop where the owners saved rare editions for me, and a community of people who valued honesty, warmth, and kindness, qualities Richard had failed to appreciate. Days passed with a gentle rhythm, mornings by the sea, afternoons painting or reading, evenings filled with quiet dinners and the soft hum of the waves. I took up small volunteer work at a local arts program, mentoring young artists, sharing not just technique, but life lessons about resilience and self-respect. Teaching became another source of fulfillment, a way to transform my ordeal into guidance for others. In those moments, I realized that freedom was not just the absence of deceit, but the presence of dignity. I had been betrayed, manipulated, and endangered, yet I had emerged whole. Richard had tried to control me, to strip me of my security, and to make me complicit in his schemes, but he had failed. I had reclaimed not only my finances and my home, but also my autonomy, my voice, and my peace of mind. I walked along the shoreline each evening, letting the wind whip through my hair, feeling the sand beneath my feet, and watching the sun melt into the horizon. Life had handed me a storm, yes, but I had navigated it with clarity, patience, and courage. And now, in the calm that followed, I could finally live fully, without fear, without resentment, and without limits. Richard no longer had a place in my life. He had lost access to my trust, my respect, and my influence. The sea, the small house, the quiet, independent life I had built, these were my victories, more profound than any confrontation, more lasting than any legal battle. I had survived and I had thrived. And as the waves whispered against the shore and the sun dipped low in the sky, I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. I was free, I was safe, and I had everything I needed. The past was behind me, and the future was entirely mine.